By the time my parents realized what they had done, it was already too late. The sale had been scheduled. The buyer had been lined up. The paperwork had been drawn up quietly over months, without my name on a single page. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was too distracted, too trusting, too much of a daughter who would just go along with it. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had been holding one document for 3 years. One document my grandmother gave me in secret. One document that changed everything. And on the night they thought they were closing a deal, I was already one step ahead. I need to stop here and tell you about the last real conversation I had with my grandmother, because this is the part that mattered most. This is the part everything else hinged on. Eleanor was 81 when she passed. In the last year of her life, her health had declined steadily. She knew it, and she accepted it with a kind of grace I still find remarkable. In the spring before she died, I spent a full week with her at the cabin, just the two of us. One evening, after dinner, she asked me to sit with her on the back porch. The sun was going down. There was a field behind the property, and the light was doing something beautiful across it. She didn't lead with sentiment. That wasn't her style, she said. You know your father loves you, but he listens to your mother, and your mother listens to money. That's not a criticism. That's just what it is. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't say anything. She continued, This land has been in our family for 40 years. I didn't buy it for investment. I bought it because I needed somewhere that belonged entirely to me. I want you to have that, not Marcus, not your parents, you. She looked at me then, really looked at me. I had my lawyer draw something up. It's not complicated, it just makes things clear. I'm giving you the document directly, because if I give it to your parents to pass along, it won't get passed along. She said it plainly, no drama, no bitterness, just a woman in her 80s who had watched her family long enough to know exactly what she was doing. I need you to keep it somewhere safe, and I need you to understand that it only works if you use it at the right time. Too early. Oh, and it causes a fight for nothing. Too late, and it won't matter anymore. I asked her why she was telling me this now, so clearly, so directly. She said, Because you're the only one I trust to know the difference between the right time and the wrong time. You've always been quieter than the others. That's not a weakness. That's your advantage. Then, she handed me an envelope. I didn't open it that night. I put it in my bag, took it home, read it carefully, and then locked it in a fireproof box at the back of my closet. It stayed there for nearly 3 years. I thought about it sometimes. I wondered if I was overthinking things. I wondered if my grandmother had been too cautious, if I'd built something significant out of a precaution that would never be needed. I don't wonder that anymore. Looking back, the signs were there earlier than I admitted to myself at the time. The first one came about 8 months after my grandmother's funeral. We were at my parents' house for a Sunday dinner, one of those obligatory gatherings that feel warm on the surface, but run on a kind of low-grade anxiety underneath. I had stepped into the kitchen to refill my glass when I overheard my mother on the phone in the hallway. She wasn't speaking loudly, but the hallway carried sound in a way the kitchen never did. She said, The acreage is the real value, yes. The structure itself is dated, but that doesn't matter if... Yes, exactly. Right. We'll talk more next week. She hung up before I could hear anything else. When she came back into the dining room, she didn't mention the call. No one did. I told myself it was probably nothing. My mother was always managing something. She could have been talking about anything. But the call didn't sit right with me. About 2 months after that, I noticed my father had started asking me questions that felt slightly off. Not suspicious, just slightly off. Things like, are you getting attached to the cabin? Or, do you ever think about how much it costs to maintain a property like that? Or even, have you thought about your long-term financial goals? They were framed as fatherly concern, but there was a direction to the questions, a lean. Then there was the conversation with Marcus. At a birthday gathering for my nephew, he said something I nearly let pass. You know, he said, not looking at me directly, with Mom and Dad's retirement situation, Oh, it might make more sense for everyone if the cabin was liquidated and the money distributed. More practical than one piece sitting unused. I looked at him and said, I use it. He just shrugged. Sure, but in terms of real value for the whole family. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Liquidated and distributed. That was the phrase that stayed with me. That was not a casual thought. That was language someone had discussed before walking into that room. I started paying closer attention after that. I need to stop here and tell you about the last real conversation I had with my grandmother, because this is the part that mattered most. This is the part everything else hinged on. Eleanor was 81 when she passed. In the last year of her life, her health had declined steadily. She knew it, and she accepted it with a kind of grace I still find remarkable. In the spring before she died, I spent a full week with her at the cabin, just the two of us. One evening after dinner, she asked me to sit with her on the back porch. The sun was going down. There was a field behind the property, and the light was doing something beautiful across it. She didn't lead with sentiment. That wasn't her style, she said. You know your father loves you, but he listens to your mother, and your mother listens to money. That's not a criticism. That's just what it is. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't say anything. She continued, This land has been in our family for 40 years. I didn't buy it for investment. I bought it because I needed somewhere that belonged entirely to me. I want you to have that. Not Marcus. Not your parents. You. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. I had my lawyer draw something up. It's not complicated. It just makes things clear. I'm giving you the document directly, because if I give it to your parents to pass along, it won't get passed along. She said it plainly, no drama, no bitterness, just a woman in her 80s who had watched her family long enough to know exactly what she was doing. I need you to keep it somewhere safe, and I need you to understand that it only works if you use it at the right time. Too early. Oh, and it causes a fight for nothing. Too late, and it won't matter anymore. I asked her why she was telling me this now, so clearly, so directly. She said, Because you're the only one I trust to know the difference between the right time and the wrong time. You've always been quieter than the others. That's not a weakness. That's your advantage. Then, she handed me an envelope. I didn't open it that night. I put it in my bag, took it home, read it carefully, and then locked it in a fireproof box at the back of my closet. It stayed there for nearly 3 years. I thought about it sometimes. I wondered if I was overthinking things. I wondered if my grandmother had been too cautious, if I'd built something significant out of a precaution that would never be needed. I don't wonder that anymore. The real discovery, the one that removed all doubt, happened on a Thursday evening in early October. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some things for my mother's birthday the following week. I let myself in with my spare key, called out to announce I was there, and heard my mother call back from the study. The study door was partially open. She was on the phone. I was about to knock when I caught enough of what she was saying to freeze in place. She said, The title transfer is straightforward once we have everything signed. We're looking at the 15th. The offer was $340,000, and they're not negotiating. They want the land, and they want it clean. A pause. No, she doesn't know anything. She visits occasionally, but she doesn't have any legal standing. I checked. Another pause. Right. Oh, the estate went through probate. Everything transferred. We're fine. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time, but was probably about 8 seconds. $340,000. The 15th? She doesn't know anything. I checked. The thing that hit me hardest was not the betrayal, though that was there, flooding in underneath everything else. What hit me first was the specificity. This was not an idea being considered. This was a transaction being finalized. There was a buyer, a price, and a closing date. The 15th was only 22 days away. I stepped back quietly, walked back to the front door, pulled it open, and called out, Mom? Hey, just dropping stuff off, leaving it here by the door, like I'd just arrived. Like I hadn't heard anything, Okay, honey, thank you. She called back. Oh, her voice was perfectly normal. Happy early birthday. Love you, I said. Love you too. I got in my car. I drove 3 blocks, pulled into a parking lot, and sat there for 20 minutes. Then, I called my grandmother's lawyer. Here's what I had already figured out before I made that call. My grandmother had told me the document was not complicated. I had read it carefully when she first gave it to me, and I had reread it twice more over the years, once after Marcus's comment about liquidating, and once after my mother's odd remark about people coming through the cabin. The document was a deed transfer. It was a legal instrument my grandmother had executed with her attorney approximately 14 months before she passed. It transferred ownership of the cabin and the 4 surrounding acres directly to me as a gift deed, outside of her estate, outside of probate. My mother had said on the phone, "The estate went through probate, everything transferred. Auntie," and she was right about that. Everything that went through the estate did transfer. But this property had been removed from the estate before Eleanor died. It never entered probate. It had already transferred to me before my grandmother passed. The cabin was already mine. It had been mine for 3 years. My parents had spent months arranging to sell a property they didn't even own. What I needed to confirm was whether the recording had been completed properly, whether the deed had actually been filed with the county clerk's office, or whether it was simply a document Eleanor had signed without completing the registration. That's what I didn't know, and that's what kept me up at night during the 20-minute drive to the parking lot. When I reached the attorney, his name was Gerald Mossner, he recognized my name immediately. "I wondered when I'd be hearing from you," he said. "Was it filed?" I asked. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. There was a short pause. "Yes," he said. "It was filed with the county recorder's office approximately 14 months before Eleanor passed. I made sure of it myself. The deed is a matter of public record." I exhaled. "They're trying to sell it," I said. "Closing date is the 15th. Another pause. "Well," he said slowly, "they're going to run into a problem." "I know," I said. "I just needed to hear it from you." I want to be honest about what happened inside me after that phone call, because it wasn't what most people might expect. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. What I felt was something closer to grief. A dull, settling grief for the version of my family I had always chosen to believe in. The version where my parents, despite their favoritism, despite their practicality about money, despite the quiet ways I'd been overlooked, still wouldn't cross this line. But they had crossed it. And now, I had to decide what to do with that. I could have called them that night. I could have confronted them immediately, demanded an explanation, and given them the chance to stop before things went further. I chose not to. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge. Well, but because I understood something my grandmother had understood long before I did. Timing is not a small thing. Acting out of raw emotion, even righteous emotion, gives the other person something to argue against. They can call you irrational. They can reframe the conversation around your reaction instead of their actions. But if you wait, if you document everything, if you let them walk all the way to the edge of something they cannot come back from, and then, quietly, legally, without drama, you simply close the door, then there's nothing to argue. I didn't confront them. I didn't call Marcus to ask what he knew. I didn't send an emotional text at midnight that I would regret. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at my kitchen table, and wrote out a timeline. Every warning sign I had noticed over the past year, and every overheard call, every leading question, every small lie. Then, I called Gerald Mossner again the next morning. I asked him what the correct process was for ensuring the property could not be transferred by anyone other than me. He told me what I needed to do, and I did it, quietly, completely, without telling a soul. I was ready, before they even knew there was a reason to worry, 22 days before the 15th. I filed a notification with the county recorder's office, confirming my ownership interest in the property. Gerald had advised that a standard title company would catch this during due diligence. but flagging it proactively ensured there could be no delay. If someone tried to rush the process, my name would be right there. 17 days before the 15th. My mother called to ask if I'd mind if a few people came through to look at the cabin. She framed it as maintenance workers. She said the roof might need attention. I said I didn't mind at all. I said, "Just let me know if you need me there." She said I didn't need to worry about it. I already knew those weren't maintenance workers. They were almost certainly the buyers walking the property. I let it happen. I said nothing. 12 days before the 15th. Gerald contacted me. A law firm representing the buyer had returned a title search with my name on it. They were asking questions. Gerald told them the property was not available for transfer, and that any sale agreement entered into by anyone other than me would be unenforceable. He did not reveal my identity yet. That was my choice. I wasn't ready for my parents to know what was coming. Not yet. 8 days before the 15th. My mother called me 3 times in one day. She had never done that before. The first call was cheerful. The second call was different. She mentioned they were dealing with some property paperwork and asked if Grandma Eleanor had ever given me any documents. I said, "She gave me a lot of things. What specifically are you looking for?" She said, "Oh, nothing specific. Just making sure things are accounted for." I said, "I'll have to look through what I have. I'll let you know." I did not let her know. The third call came from my father. He asked how I was doing, then, after some small talk, said, "Your mother mentioned she spoke with you earlier about some documents. You don't happen to have anything with Grandma's signature? Anything related to property?" The way he asked it, careful, casual, trying so hard to sound like it didn't matter, told me everything. They were panicking. "I'll check," I said. "Is there a timeline?" "No rush," he said. "Whenever you get a chance." The closing was in 8 days, 5 days before the 15th. Marcus called me. "Hey," he said. "So, Mom mentioned there might be some kind of confusion about Grandma's cabin. Something with the title. If you have any documents she might have given you, it might just help clear things up, just to close the loop." "I'll look into it," I said. Neither one of us said anything real. The night before the 15th. My phone was quiet. I lay in bed and thought about Eleanor. I thought about her saying, "You've always been quieter than the others. That's not a weakness. That's your advantage." I thought about how differently this night might have felt if I'd panicked, if I'd confronted them weeks ago in anger and let them reframe me as the difficult one. Instead, I had done exactly what she told me. I waited for the right time. At exactly 12:01 a.m., Gerald filed the formal legal notice. The sale could not proceed. Not that day. Not any day. Not without my signature. I turned off my phone, and I slept better than I had in weeks. My father called at 8:14 a.m. I didn't answer. My mother called at 8:22 a.m. I didn't answer. Marcus called at 9:07 a.m. I didn't answer. I made coffee. I sat at my table. I took my time. At 9:45 a.m., I finally called Gerald. "It's done," he said. "The title company notified the buyer's counsel this morning. The transaction has been halted pending ownership verification. They're aware the property cannot transfer." "And my parents?" I asked. "Their agent would have been notified within the hour," he replied. "They know." "How much do they know?" "They know the sale can't proceed. They don't know yet exactly why, or more specifically, they don't know yet that you've known all along." "Good," I said. "I'll call them today, but on my timeline." "Of course," he said. "Take your time. You're the one withstanding here." No, I sat with that sentence for a moment. You're the one withstanding here. I hadn't felt that in a long time. In a family that had always managed to communicate, very quietly, very indirectly, that I was the one who needed to adjust, the one who needed to be patient, the one who needed to be grateful for whatever I was given and not ask too many questions. I finally had standing. I let them wait until the afternoon. Let me be clear about what had actually happened, legally, by the time I made that call. My grandmother had executed a deed of gift 14 months before she died. The deed was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county recorder's office. Under state law, a properly recorded deed of gift transfers ownership immediately and irrevocably. My grandmother had not left the cabin to me in her will. She had given it to me while she was alive, as a legal transfer of title. The cabin and the 4 acres had been in my name for over 3 years. When my mother said on the phone that night, "She doesn't have any legal standing," I checked. She was checking the estate. She was looking at what transferred through probate, because the property had been transferred out of my grandmother's estate before her death. It never appeared in the probate inventory. A cursory check of the estate would show nothing, but any title search of the property itself, which a legitimate real estate transaction requires, would return my name. The buyer's title company ran that search as a matter of routine. My name came up. The sale collapsed. No drama, no courtroom, no tearful confrontation at the last moment. Just a document, recorded quietly in a county clerk's office 3 years earlier, doing exactly what it was designed to do. I called my mother at 2 in the afternoon. She answered on the first ring, which told me exactly how anxious she had been. "Hi," I said. "Hi." Her voice was tight, careful. I waited. She said, "We've been trying to reach you." "I know. I needed some time to think before I called." A pause. "There seems to be a situation with the cabin," she said. "Some kind of legal hold. We're not sure exactly." "I know about the hold," I interrupted. "I requested it." Silence. Not a brief pause. A genuine, suspended silence. The kind that only happens when someone has heard something that completely reorders their understanding of reality. "You requested it," she repeated slowly. "Yes." Another silence. "The cabin is in my name, Mom. It's been in my name for 3 years. Grandma Eleanor transferred it to me directly, as a deed of gift. Before she died. It was recorded with the county. Any title search would have returned my name. The silence this time was different, heavier. I could hear her breathing. We didn't know about a deed," she said. Her voice had changed. Something in it had gone flat. The performance was gone. "I know you didn't know," I said. "Or I think you didn't. I think you checked the estate and assumed that covered everything, but it didn't." More silence. "We thought," she started, then stopped. "I know what you thought," I said. "I heard your phone call, the one about the offer for $340,000, the closing date, the part where you said I didn't know anything and didn't have any legal standing." The silence that followed that sentence was the longest of all. I could hear distantly my mother moving, closing a door. When she spoke again, her voice was very low. "That wasn't... We were going to tell you. The money was going to be distributed to all 3 of you." I didn't respond to that. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had made a decision weeks ago that I wasn't going to argue about their intentions. What they had done, or tried to do, was the point. "The property isn't available," I said evenly. "It can't be sold without my consent. I wanted to tell you directly so there's no confusion," she said. "We need to talk about this as a family." "We will," I said, "but not today." And I ended the call. The family conversation happened a week later. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday afternoon. It was the first time I'd been there since the sale had fallen through. My parents were both home. Marcus was there too. My mother had asked him to come, which I had expected. Diane was not there. She'd called me separately 2 days before and said she hadn't known anything about the sale. I believed her. Diane has many qualities that frustrate me. But she is not a liar. I sat down at their kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten at my entire childhood. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. He looked like someone who had been awake for too many nights. My mother looked composed, more composed than I expected. She had had a week to prepare. Marcus looked uncomfortable, which I took as evidence that whatever role he had played in this, he hadn't been comfortable with it. No one started screaming. I'm grateful for that. This did not feel like a movie. It felt like sitting in a kitchen with 3 people I had known my entire life. all of us understanding that something had changed that couldn't be changed back. My mother opened by saying they had believed, in good faith, that the property was part of the estate and within their right to sell. They had intended to distribute the proceeds. They had not been trying to cheat me. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I'm not here to argue about what you intended. I'm here because I think we need to be honest with each other for maybe the first time in a long time. You were selling a property worth $340,000. I was not in that conversation at any point. My name was not in that conversation at any point. And when you started to suspect something was wrong, when you called me 3 times in one day, you still didn't tell me what you were doing. You tried to find out what I had. That's different from a mistake in good faith." My father nodded slowly. He didn't speak for a while. Marcus said, "She has a point," quietly, almost to himself. What I said next was the thing I had been composing in my head for weeks. "I don't know what this means for our family yet, but I needed you to understand, not through a lawyer, not through a letter, that I knew what was happening. And I knew before any of you realized I knew. I handled it the way Grandma Eleanor taught me. Quietly, legally, without drama. Because she knew me well enough to know I could. Yet, I paused. The cabin is mine. It was hers before it was mine. And she chose me. I'm going to honor that. What happens between the 4 of us now? That's something we're going to have to figure out over time. But I needed to say this directly." No one said anything for a moment. Then my father said, very quietly, "Your grandmother was right about you." I don't know exactly what he meant by it. I didn't ask. I want to tell you what actually happened in the months after, because I think these stories can sometimes make it seem like there's a clean ending. Like one conversation resolves everything and everyone goes home transformed. That's not real life. My parents were required to pay the buyer a penalty fee for the collapsed transaction. It was a portion of the earnest money, which was now forfeit, because my parents had represented themselves as having the right to sell a property they did not own. That was a financial consequence they absorbed without any help from me, and it was significant enough to cause real strain. My mother and I did not speak for nearly 2 months, not out of dramatic estrangement, more out of the mutual understanding that neither of us was ready yet. When we began talking again, it was careful. It is still careful. My father and I speak more now than we did before, which is strange. Something about the conversation at the kitchen table seemed to unlock a kind of honesty between us that had never been there before. He has never apologized explicitly, but he has said several things that I take as something close to it. Marcus and I have a different relationship now. Not warmer exactly, but clearer. He knows I know what role he played. He knows I'm not going to pretend otherwise. We are cordial, we are honest, and that is something. I kept the cabin. I have spent more time there in the past year than in all the years before it combined. I repainted the kitchen, repaired the porch, and started the garden my grandmother used to keep. It is mine, completely mine, and when I'm there, I feel the specific kind of peace that comes from something that was almost taken from you and wasn't. The peace of knowing you held on. But here's the part I keep coming back to. Not the legal win, not the collapsed sale, not even the conversation at the kitchen table. The part I keep coming back to is my grandmother standing on the back porch, watching the light go across the field, and handing me an envelope. I used to think she was protecting me from my parents, like it was a defensive move, a grandmother who saw what was coming and built a wall around her granddaughter. I don't think that anymore. I think she was doing something more complicated and more loving than that. She was showing me who I was. She didn't just give me the cabin, she gave me the experience of holding something important, quietly, for years, without telling anyone. She gave me the experience of watching the warning signs arrive and not panicking, of trusting my own instincts before I had confirmation, of choosing patience over impulse when every emotional part of me wanted to react. She gave me the document, but what she was really giving me was the practice, the proof that I could do hard things calmly, that I could be the person in the room who knew more than they let on, that quiet was not the same as weak. I think she understood, in the way that very old people sometimes understand things, that the cabin would be tested. She knew her son. She knew her daughter-in-law. She knew that a piece of land with real value would eventually become a question of who gets to decide. And she decided to answer that question before it was asked. Before she left, she made sure I had what I needed, not because she doubted me, but because she believed in me enough to make the investment. That's different from rescue. That's something I'm still learning to receive. I've thought about what I want to leave you with, and it's not the obvious thing. It's not, know your rights, or get everything in writing, or even, don't trust your family with money. Though all of those things have their truth. It's this. The people who underestimate you are giving you information. Every time my parents assumed I didn't know, every time they counted on my trust, my silence, and my habit of not asking too many questions, every time my mother calculated that I had no standing, they were telling me something about how they saw me. And here's the thing. That version of me, the quiet one, the middle child, the one without the full tuition and the career celebrations, that version of me is the one who sat in a parking lot for 20 minutes and then made exactly the right phone call. They weren't wrong that I was quiet. They were just wrong about what my quiet meant. My grandmother knew the difference. She told me, on that porch, with that light, 3 years before any of this happened. You've always been quieter than the others. That's not a weakness. That's your advantage. She was right. They thought they were taking something from me. The land, the value, the future she had imagined for me in that place. But what they actually did, in the course of trying to take it, was show me exactly who I needed to become. They showed me that I could hold something sacred without flinching, that I could see clearly without reacting, that I could move slowly and arrive exactly on time. I didn't need to be louder. I didn't need to be angrier. I didn't need to be someone other than who I already was. And I just needed to trust what my grandmother saw. And I did. If you've ever been the one in your family who was expected to stay quiet, to go along, to be patient, to be grateful and not ask too many questions, I want to hear from you. Not because I have advice to give necessarily, but because I know that kind of quiet can feel very lonely. And I know how long it can take to understand that it's not a flaw. Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if this story stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the right story at the right moment changes the way you see yourself. That's what my grandmother did for me.